Here I am with my friend Greg DeMarco, and we're back with another session of our podcast and this series of 15 invaluable laws of growth that we're going through. And today we're on law number 3, which is the law of the mirror. So without further ado, I think we'll just get right into it. What do you think, Greg?
You know what, Don? Let's do it.
Yeah, what'd you just say? Pitter patter?
Pitter patter, let's get at her.
Yeah, that's an old one then.
Pitter patter, let's get at her.
We were I got grandkids, right? Because I'm old, and my grandkids are actually way older than I think they should be because they're teenagers and actually young adults and stuff like that. So I'm really old.
Yeah.
But they were teasing their dad, because of the different terminologies that kids use today. And and when an old guy uses the same terminology, it sounds weird, so they don't like it, so anyway, I don't even know. They say some of these things, and I'm thinking it just goes way right over my head.
Over
so,
them. Yeah.
I'm not ready for it at all. But so pitter patter, let's get at it. I mean that I don't know if that would have been a cool saying way back in the day, but that's pretty old, so
there you go.
Yeah, they talk about something. Have you ever heard the term cap?
Cap?
Yeah, that's cap. Yeah.
I don't know.
Not have I. So anyway, before we embarrass ourselves, let's get on with our session, right? So
yeah,
we're talking about the law of the mirror. And maybe that's what we were just doing, looking in the mirror and seeing two old guys talking about some young stuff that we shouldn't be talking about. But when you think about the law of the mirror, what does that teach us about ourselves, our self-improvement?
So when I kind of look at that, I see it more as value in ourselves, right? We have to add value to ourselves, and I think that what the law of the mirror talks about, and if we put it in the context of selling, I really think it underscores the importance of self-perception. How do we view ourselves and how it influences our ability to succeed in selling. And we've talked about this briefly in the past, about self-image and things of this nature. But I think in the context of sales and self-improvement, I think it suggests that you need to have a positive self-image and believe in your abilities and your skill sets in order to succeed. That's how I kind of view it, is kind of taking a deep, hard look in the mirror at who you are and, what do you believe in yourself and your abilities.
Sometimes we don't like what we see in the mirror, though.
No, well, often we don't, and that's the problem. Is we often have poor self-image of ourselves, and it's that old saying about, we never outperform our self-image, right? We'll never get past what we think of ourselves. So, and I think that's what happens to a lot of people in the personal growth side of the industry, because they do all this personal growth and they learn and they see and they look at others and try and compare themselves. But the problem is they don't realize that they've never changed their perception of what they believe in themselves. And that's the whole purpose of self-development, right? Is to do that. But I'm even guilty of it. I'm guilty of it too, where I just, I learned all this stuff, read tons of books, went to seminars, and I realized that, and it was tough, that I really never changed the thought of who I was. And I had to spend a lot of time on that.
As human beings, we have a lot of capabilities within ourselves, but unfortunately, one of those capabilities we have is of knocking ourselves down, speaking poorly of ourselves when we're, and that's one of the things I think we do when we have a conversation, and look at ourselves in the mirror. I mean, it's a metaphorical mirror too, right? Although you can use a real mirror, to have that conversation. But what kind of things should you say to yourself, when you're looking in the mirror when you look in the mirror and say, hey, Greg DeMarco, today is Tuesday. What are you going to do today? What should you be telling yourself, when you're looking at yourself in the mirror?
Well, that's a good question. And what I tell myself today is totally different than what I told myself when I started this journey. And that's a really big distinction because I do believe in positive affirmations like those I am statements and they maximizing your potential and all that. The problem is if you're not at a level of self-awareness, they mean absolutely nothing. I can go to the mirror if I'm not aware of the situation I'm in or how I feel about myself, and I sit there and go, "Hey, Greg DeMarco, you're going to have a wonderful day today." That's not going to mean anything because I'm not at a stage of awareness that I understand where I'm starting from. So until you understand that, then you can start positive affirmations, like looking in the mirror and saying, you're going to have a great day today. You're going to do this, this, and this, and it's all going to work out. You're a powerful person. You're a good person. Whatever it is that floats your boat. But until you're at a level of awareness to understand where you are starting from, positive affirmations aren't going to work.
That's so we should refer somebody back to our previous video where we talked about the law of awareness and how important it is to be aware of ourself and what we're doing. And then
Yeah.
to go back to the very first episode where we said that's the law of intentionality and to be intentional about what we're doing. So all these laws, they're building on one another, really, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's the important thing is that you take it step by step because if you just think you're going to jump in, I remember going to here's a good example. I was at a mastermind in person workshop, whatever it was. Now it was great in a lot of ways, but I'll tell you where it failed. They just assume that people are at a certain level of awareness, and they really kind of skipped over that section. And at the time, about 5 years ago, I was not at that level. And then they started doing this exercise about I am statements and I'm honest, I have integrity, I'm a powerful person, all this stuff. I didn't believe it. I went through the motion and I thought, I'm just not there. I don't know why I'm saying this because I don't actually believe it. And that's an example of at least getting to the point where you realize that change is necessary and where is it going to start. It has to start with you and your self image. And once you understand that, then when you start understanding, you're gaining confidence about who you are, what your skills are, and everything else, then all that stuff can work for you. And it does for me now. Like if I start getting down, it takes me only a few seconds to get out of it and say, you know what? You're going to do this. You're a hard worker. You're smart. Let's get on it and get this solved.
It's good. Because we have to recognize what we see in the mirror too, right? In order,
That's what it's all about, though,
yeah,
right?
yeah. If we recognize what we're looking at, and sometimes can somebody else be your mirror?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's been instances in my life. You got to be careful, though, Don. I mean, there's some people that are just out to plant seeds of doubt in you. And they can be family, friends, colleagues, people who don't like you. They can be people that love you, say they love you. The unfortunate reality is you've got to be careful. But I had a friend once who was trying to do me a solid and explain something to me that I was doing wrong. And was it a slap in the face? Absolutely. It hit me hard in the ego. And but it changed me because I came to an understanding about something that I was not aware of about myself and my actions. And it can happen, but you just have to be very careful and trust those. Know that the circle, you have an inner circle of people that actually are there to try and help you.
So can you elaborate on that, or would you like to elaborate on that? Like, what kind of thing did he say to you? Was it something about the way you were, or was it something about
Yeah,
what you were doing, what you were thinking?
yeah, it was my actions and it was what I was doing and how I was thinking about it, which was completely wrong to what I thought everybody was saying. So, in other words, they weren't thinking what I thought they were thinking, and it kind of put a chip on my shoulder. So, whenever I basically wanted to interact with people, I came to the table with a chip on my shoulder, like like they were attacking me, and they weren't. And then he took me aside and he said, "You know what? You're being a jerk. And I'm going to tell you why you're being a jerk. and this is what you're doing wrong. And I think you misunderstand what everybody is. And all it came down to, really, this was when I was younger, it came down to an insecurity I had about myself. It was a limiting belief that I had buried deep that I didn't realize. And once I understood it and once I identified it, I didn't allow that to define who I was as a human being.
So there's that word limiting belief, or two words, limiting belief, that
Hmm.
seems to crop up when we have these different conversations, and that's a big deal, because we do tend to minimize what we do well, I think, in a natural way. And you don't, when you have that, when you're aware of what you're good at, you can look in the mirror and say, that's something that I do well, and own it. I think when we own what we do well, we're much more able to provide the services to our customers that they really need and that they really want.
Yeah, and I think, it's like we beat ourselves up more than others do, right? And we see our own faults. And to be honest with you, most of the time we're way off on what our faults are. We magnify them to the extent that they are so debilitating to us because of that. And we're our own worst enemies. That's where that saying came from, because we beat up on ourselves. But I think the reality is we need to look at that and understand it, but then look. The trick, I think, really is understanding what our strengths are. And when we're in a debilitating state and in this self-loathing state, it's hard for us to see the goodness that we've produced. And we have to. That's the only way that you're going to start to build your self confidence, is to say, okay, this is an exercise I do with some of my clients. Is I say, write down all your accomplishments right from when you remember the first thing, and it doesn't matter what it is. Maybe you tied your shoes, you know maybe you started walking, maybe something happened, you got married, you got your degree, maybe you finished high school. Whatever it is, you got to write all that stuff down, and then you start to realize, you know what, I'm really not that bad. And get someone to help you. Hey, what do you like? I've done that before, where I've said to my kids, for example, what do you really think my biggest strengths are? And they'll tell me. And it's sometimes things I don't even remember or think about.
There's an exercise, I think, that goes along the lines of what you were just describing. It's take an inventory of your life,
Yep.
and it's pretty interesting when you go back and pick all the key moments in your try to think of all the key moments in your life, write them down, and just do a brain dump. Don't try to classify them or qualify them in any way. Just do a brain dump
Write
of
them.
them,
Yeah.
write them all down, and take the negative ones, take the bad things that happen in your life, take the positive things that happen in your life, and then just write them down. And then actually one of the easy ways to do it is one of the effective ways to do it is to write them down on post-it notes, and then get a big board, a coroplast board or something, and then just post them on the post-it board, and then you can rearrange them, and you can say, okay, well, this was this phase of my life, this was this phase of my life, this was this phase of my life. I mean, when you get to be my age, I mean, like, that's ancient guy. You
Yep.
start, so when you don't have to agree so quick there.
Sorry.
What I did was I looked at it and said, okay, here's my life, and then you start looking, and it's different than, when I'm going to be 68 next month, and compared to someone that's in their 20s. So somebody in their 20s is going to have a different perspective on what has impacted their life. And what I did was I took everything, and I thought, okay, well, basically in the fourth quarter, you know I'm in the fourth quarter of my life, and I'm thinking, I've watched a lot of football games, and I think, a lot of the good stuff happens in the fourth quarter. So I'm really looking forward to the fourth quarter. But I think it's important for us to recognize where we're at, and we can do that by looking in the mirror and identifying these different things in our life that have had an impact, and thinking about what was the impact. What was the impact of that friend of yours? You just mentioned that situation where somebody said something to you. So that was a event in your life that changed, it had a
Yep.
significant change to you. you know Things like getting married, parents passing away, different things, they have and for some people it's there's tragic events in their life, that have impacted them and give them a false view of who they really are. So identify we need to identify what those tragic things are as well, and don't let them hold you hostage.
Well, I really, really like what you just said there a minute ago, and I think it's important to circle back to it. And that's about impact. Because most people, the reason why they kind of stagger back into their self doubt is because they don't realize what impact they've made on humanity or their company or their family or their friends. And that's really huge because I like what you said there. I mean, we need to identify, and that's what it is really identifying what impact we have on the world. Now, I've never been a fond believer, honestly, where, I'm going to change the world and that's what I'm going to do. The reason is because that's such an unbelievable task to think that you're going to change the world. But how I think of it is I'm going to change my world and the world around me. So the people that I'm influenced by and the people who I influence, what impact am I leaving to them? My kids, my family, my friends. That's what's important. I think you kind of hit something on the head there with that.
Having an impact in our world is I think what we all want to do is, and I think you look at that at different stages. And like I mentioned before, I'm in the fourth quarter, so you start thinking about significance. What in my life was significant. Like what did I do
Yeah.
these? What was all this about? And that's so I think the law of the mirror is somewhat of a self-reflective process that we can go through to identify where we have an impact, and identify different things that are holding us back, and then being able to make some adjustments to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, listen, it all comes down to a lot like our actions have rippling effects throughout our community and that expands hopefully out into the rest of the world. We don't know how much we affect the whole world, but we know how much we can think about what ripple effects happen within our own families and our communities. And all this comes down to having self-confidence. You have to continuously learn, mindset, building those relationships and setting goals. And I think that really this chapter, this law of the mirror that we're talking about, it underscores the importance of the self-perception, self-confidence, all of that, and appreciating your own value. That's what it really comes down to, and adding value to others.
Yeah, that's great. So what practical steps would you have to improve your self-image?
Well, we've briefly touched on some of those. Setting realistic goals, celebrating your achievements. You have to celebrate the good things in your life. Self compassion, be kind to yourself. Understand that everyone makes mistakes and faces challenges in their life. You got to treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a friend in a similar situation. So, why are you beating yourself up when you're consoling a friend who has maybe similar issues? Positive visualization in general. You got to surround yourself with the right people and positivity. One of the biggest challenges that people have, and I suffer from this all the time, accepting a compliment.
Oh yeah.
People don't like to accept compliments from others, and they don't know what to say. It's almost like, oh my God, I'm going to run away right now. I gotta put my hand in the sand. Yet, that's all about self care and just listen. In the end, positive affirmations can work for us, but we just have to be in the right frame of mind in order to understand what those affirmations are doing for us.
Yeah, For me, for me, I think two important things to do are what you had suggested, where you take an inventory of
Yeah.
all the different things that have gone well, and that I think is a combination of what I was mentioning before, where you do the thing with the post-it notes, write down all the significant events, and then going through and evaluating them, and making sure that you're aware, of what it is. What are your strengths? Identify what your strengths are, and then identify what in your life has kept you from utilizing those strengths. Because you might have it, and a strength isn't necessarily something that you do well. It's also something that gives you energy and gives you life. And when you have something that gives you energy and gives you life, it's an indicator that if you develop that, that's going to develop into a strength. And unless you're like, I mean, for us old guys, we like hockey, and or we like basketball or whatever. Might like a sport, but it doesn't matter how much we like it and how much energy it gives us. It doesn't matter. We're not going to ever get to the point where we're good at it, right? So, but just, so there's got to be, use some wisdom there. But yeah, so I think there's some different exercises that you can do. Use the law of intentionality, use the law of awareness, and to help you, with the law of the mirror. And I'd recommend that everybody buy the book. It's a great book. 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. It's not a difficult read. John Maxwell he's a very good communicator. He speaks in an engaging way and tells good stories. And yeah, it's a fun book, to go through. So I'd recommend that people buy the book. You read the book. And if I was smart, I'd have a link to an Amazon link here, and they could buy it, and then I could get paid for it.
Yeah, that's right. But we're just a couple of old guys, and we don't think of these things. So there you go.
There you go. Well, thanks a lot, Greg, for your wisdom, and
Thank you.
I look forward to next week when we're talking about the law of reflection.
There
Which
you go.
again, ties, like they all just kind of build one on top of the other. So looking forward to it. So
Me
take care.
too. We'll talk to you. Bye.